By every visible measure, her marriage was flawless. They arrived together, left together, sat close enough at dinners that people assumed intimacy lived easily between them. His hand rested at the small of her back in public. Fingers warm and steady, the gesture practiced enough to feel natural. To anyone watching, it looked like possession. To her, it felt like choreography. 18 months married, and the man who held her in front of cameras had never touched her behind closed doors. Not once. The difference between public and private had become so stark it felt intentional. Like a line he drew each night and never crossed. She stood in the master bedroom, their bedroom in name only, watching the city bleed light through the windows. Seoul, at night, was loud with promise. Below them, people lived full, complicated lives. Above them, everything was controlled. Behind her, the door opened. "You're still awake," he said. His voice always did that. Entered a room before the rest of him did. Low, precise, impossible to ignore. "So are you," she replied without turning. Silence followed. Heavy, familiar. When she finally faced him, she saw the man the world feared and admired in equal measure. His eyes were so dark they almost looked black, gaze sharp and unyielding unless he chose otherwise. Broad shoulders stretched the clean lines of his suit, posture immaculate, as if he had been carved rather than shaped. His jaw was severe, his mouth controlled, beauty edged with something dangerous. Unfair beauty, she thought, as she had so many times before. Men like him weren't meant to be wanted quietly. "You have an event tomorrow," he said. "We'll leave at 7. "We." Always we in public. She nodded. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" A pause, brief but real. "Pretending what?" "That we go to bed together," she said softly. His gaze flicked away for half a second. That was all the confirmation she needed. He had built his life on knowing exactly where every line was drawn. Power demanded boundaries. Survival demanded discipline. Love, real love, demanded vulnerability he could not afford. So he performed. In public, he played the devoted husband flawlessly. He touched her when it was expected. Held her when eyes were watching. Let the world believe what it wanted to believe. In private, he kept his hands to himself. Because private touch was not performance. Private touch was truth. If he crossed that line, if he allowed himself the quiet intimacy of her body, her warmth, the unguarded space between them, he knew exactly what would happen. He would love her more. And loving her more would make her the sharpest weapon anyone could ever use against him. She already mattered too much. She stopped asking questions around month 6. Not because she stopped caring, but because hope without answers felt like bleeding quietly. By month 12, she learned how to move through the penthouse without expecting him to follow. How to sleep alone in a bed that had never been shared. How to smile at events where people congratulated her on a marriage she didn't have. She loved him. She had almost from the beginning. That was the cruelest part. By month 18, she decided she needed something of her own. That was how the music lessons began. The first time he heard the piano, he thought he was imagining it. Music did not belong in his home. Sound without purpose unsettled him. He stood in the hall, jacket removed, listening as notes filled the space he had kept sterile for over a year. When he saw her at the piano, shoulders relaxed, face intent, alive in a way he had never given her permission to be, something inside him tightened. The man beside her was harmless. Attractive, yes, but soft. Present without weight. That made him dangerous. And for the first time since the wedding, the line he had drawn so carefully began to blur. The music teacher's name was Min-jae. He arrived precisely on time, every time. Soft-spoken, composed, dressed like a man who understood private spaces and how to respect them. Not flashy, not trying, just quietly appealing. The kind of attractive that didn't demand attention but earned it anyway. He bowed his head the first day. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Kang." She'd almost corrected him. Not because the name wasn't hers, it was, but because it still felt like a costume she wore for other people. "Please," she said, "call me." He smiled gently. "I'll call you what you prefer, but I won't assume familiarity. Not here." The words were simple, respectful, and somehow they made her chest tighten. She nodded. "Then Mrs. Kang is fine." Min Jae's gaze dropped to her hands. "Do you have any experience?" "Not really." "That's okay," he said. "We'll start with listening first. Most people rush to perform." He pulled the bench back slightly, giving her space to sit without hovering. When he took his place at the piano, his hands moved with an easy confidence. Long fingers, steady wrists, a quiet precision that didn't need to announce itself. She watched him play a short piece. Nothing dramatic, just something clean and clear. And for the first time in months, the penthouse didn't feel like a well-designed cage. It felt like a room with breath in it. "Your posture's good," Min Jae said after a moment, stepping behind her. "May I adjust your shoulder?" he asked first. That alone felt like a gift. "Yes," she said softly. His touch was brief, 2 fingers, professional, careful, guiding her shoulder down a fraction. Then he stepped away immediately. "No tension," he said. "Music can tell when you're bracing." Her throat tightened at that. So can people. Min Jae's eyes softened like he'd heard more than she'd said. But he didn't pry. Instead, he pointed to the keys. "Let's start with something simple. Let it sound the way it sounds. No judgment." He listened from the hall for 7 minutes before he forced himself to move. 7 was too long. 7 meant he was standing still outside a room where another man was with his wife, and the only reason it was allowed was because he had allowed it. He walked into the living space without announcing himself, habit, and watched the lesson from a distance. Min Jae was calm, controlled, respectful. The kind of man who would never make a scene. Which meant if something did happen, it would be quiet, hidden behind politeness. He didn't like quiet threats. His wife sat at the piano bench in a cream sweater, skin the rich tone of polished mahogany under warm light, her hair pinned back loosely. She looked different. Not softer, just less armored. He'd spent 18 months ensuring she didn't become a vulnerability, and now, in a matter of minutes, he watched her relax for someone else. Min Jae glanced up, noticed him, and offered a polite bow. "Mr. Kang," he said evenly. His wife turned, and for the first time in a long time he saw surprise flicker across her face. Then something else. Not guilt, not fear, expectation. As if she'd been waiting to see whether he would show. "Continue," he said, voice flat. Min Jae did. And he stood there, watching his wife's fingers touch keys she'd never touched before, watching her concentrate, watching her mouth soften around a quiet breath when she got a chord right. It wasn't intimacy, but it was attention. And it felt like losing ground he hadn't known he'd surrendered. After Min Jae left, the quiet returned. But it didn't settle the same way. Her husband was still there. Not in the hall, in the room. He stood near the bar, sleeves rolled, dark eyes fixed on the piano like it had offended him. "You didn't tell me," he said. She set the sheet music down carefully. "You didn't ask." A pause. He looked at her then, really looked, and the intensity in his gaze made her pulse jump in a way she refused to show. "Who hired him?" he asked. "I did." His jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because I needed something that answered when I touched it. Because I needed to feel chosen by something, anything. Because your restraint is killing me quietly." She lifted her chin instead. "Because I wanted to learn." "Why now?" She held his stare. "Because I live here." Something flashed behind his eyes, anger or guilt, she couldn't tell which. Then his voice dropped. "Be careful." There it was again, that word. Not affection, not apology, control disguised as concern. "Of what?" she asked. He hesitated, just enough to reveal he was choosing his answer. "Of being seen," he said finally. She laughed softly, bitter. "You make sure I'm seen in public." His gaze sharpened. "That isn't the same." "No," she agreed. "It's worse." He went still. She could almost see him bite back whatever he wanted to say. "What he does here," he said instead, voice clipped, "stays professional." She blinked. "Of course it does." His eyes dropped to her hands on the music, then lifted again. "Good," he said. And then, as if the words had cost him, he turned and walked away. The jealousy hit him 2 days later, not like rage, like a slow poison. He came home earlier than scheduled, intentionally, and found her in the music room laughing. A soft sound, warm and unguarded. Min-jae stood a few feet away, saying something gentle, smiling like he had earned that laugh. His wife's face was lit from within, eyes bright, shoulders loose. She was beautiful always, her skin deep and luminous, her features strong in a way that made her look like she belonged anywhere. But in that moment she looked free. Free from vigilance, free from his rules. He didn't move, didn't interrupt. He simply watched, silent, severe, controlled, until Min-jae noticed him and straightened. "Mr. Kang," Min-jae said again, respectful. His wife turned. Her smile faded, not because she'd done anything wrong, but because his presence always changed the air. He hated that. He hated that she relaxed for someone else and braced for him. "We're finishing," she said calmly. Min-jae nodded, gathering his things. "There's a small outdoor concert this Saturday," he said to her, tone neutral. "It's informal. Students and professionals. If you'd like to listen in person, it helps the ear. You're welcome." Her husband's gaze snapped to Min-jae so sharply it felt like a blade. It was an invitation. Not romantic, not private. Still, an invitation. Her wife glanced at him automatically, as if asking permission without meaning to. The sight of it tightened something in his chest. She shouldn't have to ask, and he shouldn't have to care. But he did. "Go," he heard himself say. Both of them looked at him. His wife's brows lifted slightly. "Go?" His voice stayed calm, but he could feel the edge under it. "You should go." Min-jae dipped his head. "Thank you." His wife held his gaze a beat longer, trying to read him. Then she said softly, "Okay?" Saturday arrived like a quiet rebellion. Not because it was forbidden, because it was hers. She dressed simply, black coat, soft scarf, nothing that screamed status, nothing that invited attention. Security trailed at a distance, discreet enough to pretend she was normal. Min-jae met her near the small courtyard stage, polite and calm. He didn't comment on her guards, didn't ask questions. He offered her a program and pointed to a bench. "Listen for the way the wind changes the sound," he said. "It's different outside." She sat, letting the first notes wash over her. It wasn't romance, it wasn't escape, it was relief. For an hour, she was not a symbol, not a wife on display, not an asset protected by a man who wouldn't touch her. She was just a woman listening. Afterward, Min-jae walked her toward the gate, still a respectful distance away. "You did well this week," he said. "I barely did anything." "You showed up," he replied. "That's most of it." The words hit her harder than they should have. Because she had been showing up for 18 months. and the person she wanted to notice hadn't. She returned to the penthouse and found her husband waiting. Not in the hall, in the living room, like he'd been there the entire time, even if he hadn't. "How was it?" he asked. She looked at him, searching his face. "It was beautiful," she said honestly. His eyes darkened. "Did he touch you?" he asked quietly. Her breath caught, not at the question, but at what it revealed. "No," she said, "of course not." He stared at her for a long moment, jaw tight. Then, very softly, he said, "Good." The word shouldn't have felt like a lock clicking into place. But it did, and for the first time in 18 months she wondered if the thing keeping them apart wasn't lack of love, but fear of it. The change was not dramatic. That was how she knew it was real. He did not raise his voice. He did not forbid the lessons. He did not tighten security or issue new rules. He simply appeared in rooms he used to avoid. At times, he used to be absent. Close enough that she could feel him before she saw him. The morning after the concert, she found him in the kitchen while the staff moved quietly around them. "You're up early," she said. "I didn't sleep," he replied. Something about the honesty startled her. He stood at the counter, sleeves rolled, dark hair slightly disordered in a way she almost never saw. In the harsh morning light, his beauty looked sharper, more severe, jaw set like cut glass, eyes dark and watchful. She poured herself coffee, deliberately unhurried. "You waited up," she said. "Yes." "Not for you, but the implication hung there anyway." She took a sip. "You didn't ask me where I was." "I know where you were." "Did you?" He finally looked at her then, gaze intense enough to make her still. "Yes," he said. "I always do." That should have felt comforting. It didn't. He hated the concert because it had been harmless. No confrontation, no impropriety, no threat he could eliminate. Just her, standing in a crowd, face turned toward music, eyes soft in a way she never looked at him. He had watched from a distance. Not because he didn't trust her, because he didn't trust himself. He had built his discipline carefully, brick by brick. Public affection, private restraint, a perfect balance between legitimacy and survival. And now, a pianist with steady hands and gentle eyes had put a hairline fracture through it. "You don't have to stop the lessons," he said later that evening, as if the words had been waiting all day to be spoken. She looked up from the sofa, surprised. "I wasn't planning to." Good, he thought, and terrible. "I'm not asking you to," he continued. "I just want to be clear about expectations." Her mouth curved faintly. "You're very good at expectations." His jaw tightened. "This isn't a joke." "No," she agreed quietly, "it isn't." She set the book aside and stood, moving closer, not into his space, but near enough that he could smell her perfume, warm and subtle against her skin. "You've never told me what you expect from me in private," she said. "Only what you expect me to be in public." The words landed precisely where she intended. "I expect you to be safe," he said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters." "For you," she said. He said nothing. Because she was right. The second lesson after the concert felt different. Not because Min-jae changed, because her husband didn't leave. He sat in a chair near the window, tablet in hand, posture relaxed in a way that was clearly a lie. His presence filled the room, a quiet gravity that bent the air around it. Min-jae noticed, of course. He always noticed things, but he didn't comment. "Again," Min-jae said softly, nodding toward the keys. "Slower this time." Her fingers moved, tentative but improving. Behind her, she could feel her husband's gaze like a weight between her shoulder blades. When Minjae adjusted her wrist, brief, professional, she felt it immediately. Not the touch, the tension. Her husband didn't move, didn't speak, but something in the room tightened, sharp and electric. "Good," Minjae said, stepping back. "You're learning to trust your hands." Trust, the word echoed. When the lesson ended, Minjae bowed politely to both of them. "I'll see you next week," he said to her. She nodded. "Thank you." After the door closed, the silence was thick enough to cut. "You didn't need to stay," she said. "I wanted to." "Why?" He didn't answer right away, then quietly, "I wanted to see." Her breath caught. "See what?" "If he looked at you," he said, "the way I thought he might." Her heart began to race. And did he? No. Relief flickered across his face before he could stop it. She saw it, and something inside her broke. He realized too late that he'd revealed himself. The relief had been instinctive, unfiltered. He had spent 18 months denying himself instinct. She turned fully toward him now, eyes sharp, voice calm in a way that made him brace. "You don't trust him," she said. "I trust him not to be stupid." "That's not what I asked." He exhaled slowly. "I trust him." "Then what's the problem?" "You are." The answer burned behind his teeth. Instead, he said, "This arrangement exists because control matters." "Control over what?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Over myself." The admission was a crack, small but real. Her voice softened. "Why?" "Because loving you would ruin me. Because wanting you would rewrite everything. Because I would choose you over survival." He stepped closer before he could stop himself, stopping just short of touching her. "You don't understand what you represent," he said quietly. She swallowed. "Then explain it to me." He hesitated. This was the edge, the line he'd never crossed. "If I let myself love you openly," he said slowly, "you would become my weakness." Her eyes widened just slightly. "I already am," she said, "whether you touch me or not." The words landed like a blow. He stared at her, chest tight, the truth settling into place with brutal clarity. She had been vulnerable the entire time. Not because he loved her, because she loved him. And he had left her alone with it. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said the thing she'd been holding back for 18 months. "You touch me in public," she said. "You hold me when it's required. You let the world think I belong to you." He didn't interrupt. "But in private," she continued, "you won't even reach for me. So tell me, what am I supposed to believe?" He had no answer. She nodded slowly, as if confirming something for herself. "I don't want the pianist," she said. "I don't want anyone else." Her voice wavered just slightly. "I want my husband." The word hit him harder than any threat ever had. He reached for her without thinking, stopped himself inches away. The restraint trembled, visible now, fraying at the edges. "If I cross that line," he said hoarsely, "there's no going back." She held his gaze, steady and unafraid. "Then stop standing on it," she whispered. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then, finally, he did something he had not allowed himself in 18 months. He cupped her face, not publicly, not performatively, privately, fully. Her breath broke on a soft sound she hadn't meant to make. "This," he said quietly, thumb brushing her cheek, "is what I was afraid of." She leaned into his hand. "And this," she replied, "is what I've been waiting for." He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But when he rested his forehead against hers, the wall he'd built finally cracked wide enough for truth to slip through. The call came just after midnight. Not from security, not from the board, from a number he hadn't seen in years. He answered without greeting. "They know," the voice said, his jaw tightened. "Know what?" "That you hesitate." Silence stretched, dangerous, measured. "You made yourself predictable," the voice continued. "A wife, a routine, a life that can be watched." He looked across the darkened penthouse to the closed door of her room, the door he had refused to cross for 18 months. "You called to tell me something I already understand," he said. "No," the voice replied. "I called to tell you she was seen." His blood went cold. "Where?" "At the concert last week, at the lesson since. You let her exist without you." The line went dead. He stood there for a long moment, phone heavy in his hand, truth settling with brutal clarity. He had believed restraint would keep her safe. It had done the opposite. She felt the shift before she saw him. He entered her room without knocking, something he had never done, and closed the door behind him with deliberate care. "You're not going out tomorrow," he said. She sat up in bed, heart thudding. "Excuse me?" "Cancel the lesson," he continued, effective immediately. Her spine straightened. "No." The refusal was calm, absolute. He stopped short, dark eyes sharp, dangerous in a way that made the room feel smaller. "This is not negotiable." "It is," she said quietly. "Because you don't get to take things away without telling me why." He exhaled through his nose, visibly reining himself in. "They're watching," he said. "The lessons, the concert. They're looking for leverage." Her breath caught. "Because of me?" "Because of me," he corrected. "You are the means." She stood, crossing the space between them until she was close enough to see the strain in his face, the crack beneath the discipline. "You were afraid loving me would make me a weapon," she said softly. "Yes. And now?" His gaze dropped to her mouth, lingered. "Now they know you already are." The admission hung between them, raw and unarmored. "So what changes?" she asked. He looked at her then, really looked, like a man forced to accept that the battle had shifted. "Everything." He tightened security, canceled appearances, drew her closer in public. Not farther. The world noticed. Hands lingered longer at her waist. His gaze tracked her constantly. The performance sharpened into something more possessive, more visible. In private, however, the distance became unbearable. Every time he passed her in the hall, every time her sleeve brushed his arm, the restraint screamed. She had always been his weakness. He had just refused to name it. "You can't keep pretending this doesn't matter," she said one evening, voice steady, eyes bright with something like resolve. "You're already choosing me in public. Why am I still untouchable in private?" He swallowed. "Because once I cross that line," he said, "there is no illusion left." "Good," she replied. "I'm tired of living in one." The night the threat surfaced properly, it wasn't loud. No guns, no shouting. Just an envelope delivered to the penthouse. Inside, a photograph. Her, at the piano. Minjae blurred in the background. A message, simple and precise. "Choose carefully." Her hands didn't shake. She carried the envelope to him herself. "They think this will scare me," she said. He took it, eyes darkening. "It should." "It doesn't," she replied, "because I already chose." His breath caught. "You shouldn't have had to." She stepped closer, close enough that the air between them felt charged, alive. "I married you knowing you were dangerous," she said. "I didn't know you'd be afraid." The word stung, but it was true. "I'm afraid of losing you," he said quietly. "That's not weakness." "No," she agreed. "But letting me feel unwanted is." The silence that followed was heavy, irrevocable. She reached for him, didn't stop. Her hands rested against his chest, feeling the hard, steady beat beneath. "This ends tonight," she said, "one way or another." He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, had feared it, had wanted it. He covered her hands with his own, warm, steady, real. "I can't protect you from everything," he said, "but I can stop pretending distance is protection." Her eyes softened. "That's all I ever wanted." He leaned down, pressing his forehead to hers, breathing her in. "This will make you my priority," he said, "above strategy, above image." "Good," she whispered, "be human." His control finally slipped. Not into chaos, but into choice. He kissed her, slowly, carefully, like something sacred rather than stolen. Her breath broke against his mouth, hands gripping his shirt as if anchoring herself to the truth of him. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark, intent, stripped of pretense. "Tonight," he said, voice low, certain. "There will be no performance." She nodded, pulse racing, heart full. "Tonight," she replied, "I want my husband." He took her hand, not for the world, not for legitimacy, for himself, and led her toward the bedroom they had never shared. The bedroom had always been there, prepared, pristine, untouched. She had walked past it for 18 months, aware of its existence in the way one is aware of a closed door in their own home. Familiar, unanswered. He closed it behind them, not quickly, not dramatically, deliberately. The city fell away. The world narrowed to the quiet between their breaths. He didn't reach for her immediately. Instead, he stood in front of her, dark eyes intent, posture no longer armored, but grounded. Up close, the sharpness of him softened just enough to reveal what lived underneath. Devotion held too tightly for too long. "I need you to understand something," he said. She nodded. "I'm listening." "If I do this," he continued, voice low and steady, "I will not be careful with my heart any more. I will not pretend you are anything less than what you are to me." Her throat tightened. "And what am I?" His hand lifted, slow, visible, and brushed her cheek with irreverent certainty. "My wife," he said, "my weakness, my choice." The words settled into her like warmth. "I've been choosing you," she whispered, "every day, even when you didn't see it." His jaw flexed, emotion flickering behind his eyes. "I see it now," he said, "and I'm done denying it." Touch changed everything, not because it was forbidden, but because it was honest. When he finally pulled her into his arms, it wasn't urgent, it wasn't desperate. It was the steady, grounding hold of a man who had accepted the cost and chosen it anyway. She fit against him as if she always had. He kissed her slowly, learning the shape of her mouth, the sound she made when relief broke through restraint. Her hands slid into his hair, anchoring him there, present and unguarded. Every instinct in him screamed vulnerability, and for the first time, he didn't silence it. He carried her to the bed they had never shared, movements unhurried, intentional. The world outside could wait. Strategy could wait. Everything could wait. What mattered was the truth unfolding between them, layer by layer, breath by breath. When they finally came together, it wasn't about hunger. It was about recognition and choosing each other without armor. Morning light filtered softly through the curtains. She woke slowly, warmth at her back, his arm around her waist. Heavy, real, inescapable. For one terrifying second, she wondered if she'd imagined it. Then he shifted, tightening his hold, forehead resting against her shoulder. "You're awake," he murmured. "Yes." "Good," he said quietly. "I was afraid I'd waited so long you'd disappear." She turned to face him, tracing the line of his jaw with gentle certainty. "I'm still here," she said. "I always was." His gaze softened in a way she had never seen before, unguarded, open. "I won't make you wait again," he promised. "Not for touch, not for truth." She smiled, heart full in a way it had never been. The fallout came swiftly. The photograph surfaced, the message circulated, the threat moved from implication to action, and he ended it, decisively. Not with spectacle, but with precision. Those who thought his wife was leverage learned something quickly and painfully. She was not a weakness he hid. She was a line no one crossed. By the end of the week, the message was clear. His organization remained intact. Stronger, even, no longer pretending legitimacy but reshaped by it. The world adjusted, it always did. The music lessons ended quietly. Min-jae bowed when he said goodbye, eyes kind, respectful as ever. "You listen deeply," he said. "Don't stop." She smiled. "I won't." And she didn't. Music stayed, the piano stayed, the parts of herself she'd reclaimed stayed, but the space she'd needed to fill was no longer empty. In public, they were still flawless. In private, they were real. He touched her without fear now, hands sure, presence unrestrained. Not because danger had vanished, but because denial no longer served them. One evening, as they stood on the terrace overlooking the city, she leaned into him easily, naturally. "You know," she said, "everyone thinks we finally look like a married couple." He smiled faintly. "Finally?" She laughed softly. "We always were. We just weren't speaking the same language." He kissed her temple, grounding sure. "We are now." She had wanted his love from the very beginning. What she had learned, slowly, painfully, was that wanting did not make her weak, and loving him, fully, openly, had not destroyed him, it had anchored him. As the city pulsed below them, she rested her head against his chest, heart steady, no longer waiting. Not for touch, not for truth, not for permission. He had built his life on power, control, and survival. What he had never planned for was happiness. But as he held her, his wife, his equal, his chosen vulnerability, he understood something essential at last. Strength wasn't the absence of weakness. It was choosing what mattered most, and defending it without apology. They did not become safe. They became solid. And that was better. This has been a Neon Obsidian audio story, where restraint is dangerous and desire is never accidental. Subscribe for more slow burn cinematic romance.